we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we and all of you meet. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging.
Welcome to the podcast, Sex, Love and Science with Lauren and Lauren, two sex and relationship experts.
We will address all of the big issues in sex, love, and relationships.
We recognize that humanity is diverse. All bodies, orientations, and sexualities are welcome.
Brakes and accelerators. What are your turn-ons and turn-offs for sex? What are your partner's turn-ons and turn-ons for sex? We really need to know what gets our gears going sexually and what takes us out of a sexual mindset in order to maximize our opportunities for sexual pleasure.
Exactly, Lauren. I think, what a huge topic. What makes us want sex? What turns us off? And there's going to be a lot of common ones for a lot of people. And then there's going to be a lot of things that it's just a matter of figuring out. I don't know about you, but I've got so many people who say, I don't know what I like. I don't know what turns me on.
Yeah, a lot of people say they know what they don't like. It's a lot easier to access those turn-offs or what we call breaks. But to find out what you do enjoy, it can be really hard to know where to start. And we're here to really help you explore that.
Exactly. So, what I think is pretty relevant is how do we push those accelerators and how do we work with the brakes? Because that's just going to lead to better sex.
Yeah, so let's give you a bit of an explanation of what we're talking about. So brakes and accelerators, or what's commonly called the dual control model, is a model for sexuality which works in tandem, where your accelerators turn you on and your brakes turn you off, much like the pedals in a car. You can have them both going at the same time, though. Some accelerators and some brakes. It is a bit of a special car in that way, but they work in tandem.
Well, the dual control model is quite fascinating, but the thing that I find really interesting is that it's actually not that long ago. This is research that's been collated from the 90s, the late 90s, and the leaders in the dual control model was Eric Janseen and John Bancroft.
Yeah, they actually were doing research in the 90s around this. I mean, how sad is that they started looking at pleasure and sexuality in the 90s? I mean, there was a bit beforehand, but this really leapt up in that period.
Yeah, and they collated research from around the globe, which really kind of helped with the accelerators and brakes. They won 2 scientific awards that were huge and actually changed the way that people really look at sexual attitudes and behaviors. I just find it fascinating.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? I guess, this is the first time we're looking at, people's needs and drivers for sex, not just looking at sex from a physiological perspective of arousal and plateau, but looking at the drivers, the why.
Absolutely. And this is really important to know for a relationship, because if your partner's brakes are being slammed on, that does not mean it's necessarily you. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're undesirable. You've turned, maybe you have done something to turn them off. That is a possibility. Sometimes a person's brakes can look like I've been really stressed and I'm caught up in my head and I can't even get in touch with my own body today. I'm really worried about these deadlines. I'm worried about the kids. I'm worried about my parents. We just had a fight and I don't know how you feel about me. So these are all some brakes that could be an inner monologue going on for someone.
Yeah, it's really important we know about these different factors. I mean, when was the last time you actually spoke to your partner about what turns you on and turns you off? Or better yet, when was the last time you sat with yourself and thought about, hey, what turns me on? What turns me off? A lot of people really lack that knowledge, but much like, knowing what we do and don't like to eat or when we like to eat is really important information for us to live. So is this information about our sexuality.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, Lauren. And I think what you made is a really good point is when do we sit with ourselves and actually think about this? So I'm going to give you guys some homework. Get out a piece of paper after this episode and in one column put brakes, in one column write accelerators. And think about what excites you, what turned you off. And do a little bit of journaling.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's find yours out. Let's give you some ammo, some stuff that you can actually talk to your partners about to say, this is what I need from you. From these brakes and accelerators, we can form requests, things that we ask our partner or things we do ourselves.
Exactly. Now let's look at accelerators.
Okay.
What could some of that look like? And just note here that these could be external things. This could be things within your own body. So we're going to think quite broadly here.
Yeah. I like to say to clients that these brakes and accelerators come in 4 categories. So the first category is cognitive. So things that are in your mind, the thoughts you think, the mental state you're in, how you see yourself. These are cognitive examples of brakes or accelerators. The next one we have are physical ones. So things in your body. Whether you feel sick, whether you are comfortable in your body. So they're physical ones. Well, next one after that is environmental. So whether you have kids in the room or you have your family in the room next door, or it's hot or cold in the room, environmental factors play a role. The last one is interpersonal brakes and accelerators. So these are things that are happening between you and your partner. So relational aspects to this. So let's start with accelerators and let's look at those categories. Let's start with the cognitive accelerators. What are some of the things in your mind, Lauren, that might turn someone on?
Well, potentially might be a little bit of a fantasy. Maybe I was really turned on by seeing somebody today, and that got me thinking about something else. And then I started kind of simmering in this a little bit today. That could cognitively turn me on.
Definitely. I think the brain, as they say, is the biggest sex organ we have, right? So the thoughts that pass through your mind can be real accelerators. Fantasy is such a great example, Lauren. A lot of people are really aroused by their imagination. But then they get in a relationship setting and they don't activate their imagination at all.
Yeah. A lot of people don't. I love hearing when I've got a couple or an individual or saying that they use their partner to fantasize about during masturbation.
Mm-hmm.
I always want to give them a big high five. Oh, that sounds great. And not that there's anything wrong if you don't fantasize about your partner, but it's their way of trying to integrate a bit of desire for their partner if they're needing that in their relationship. So that's a good way of doing it.
Definitely. Accelerators in your mind might be how you think about your body, your relationship to yourself, your thoughts about your own sexual confidence. A big one is feeling sexually confident. That's a cognitive accelerator. When you feel confident in your mind, you're confident in your beliefs about yourself, that can accelerate you to want to have more sex.
Exactly. Just staying within your truth is something that we've spoken about in a few of those other episodes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a bit of a theme here.
Definitely. Well, let's look at some of the other categories. So let's look at relational accelerators. So things between you and other people, interpersonal ones.
Interpersonal, that's a good one because, sometimes it is just being thought of. Your partner wanting to spend time with you, your partner wanting to turn towards you or engage with you, really. That could be a really nice accelerator.
Yeah, those contexts with each other, that connecting power that we have with our partner, that can really turn people on. And, in one of our other podcast episodes, we've spoken about initiation styles, that sentimental initiation style, someone that's turned on by emotional connection, will really love emotional connection as an accelerator. That's something you can do for them.
What was the next category, Lauren? After interpersonal?
Next one is physical things. So things with your body, accelerators in your body that belong to your body or about your physical presence.
So could that look like me touching somebody or somebody touching me?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So it works both ways.
Yeah. It can also be if you've done a really nice yoga class and you feel really present in your body, or it can be that you are not tired. You've had a good sleep.
Oh, I don't know what that looks like, but that would be amazing.
Yeah. Or just your wellness, whether you're actually feeling healthy or not. Feeling healthy is an accelerator. I'm feeling healthy today, feeling energized today in my body.
Exactly. How often do we hear people say, when I feel really fit and I need to feel good about myself, I feel better in the bedroom. The two usually work very, very closely to one another.
That's right. That's not to say you have to be fit to have an accelerator for sex, because all bodies can feel good, right? So we're looking at how your body and whatever ability or physical state you have feels good, whatever feels nice for your body, yourself.
Exactly. And, on that topic, I'm going to go off a little bit on a tangent, but I kind of go into the body image paradox that, we're so caught up in having to feel sexy and, think about our body. But really, at the end of the day, our body is capable of feeling amazing things regardless of the shape it is, which I think is really important.
Very much so, Lauren. I think that knowing that your body can feel pleasure and leaning into that pleasure can be really, really much an accelerator for a lot of people.
And that's quite an advanced step to get to, is when you're almost ambivalent about your body and you're really just tapping into your pleasure.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a huge ask in society today, right? And it's a hugely, obvious ableist elements to that we feel good in our bodies, right? But I guess it's just about appreciating what you do have when you can, and trying to lean rather than aesthetics into sensation-based relationship with your body, the sensations it can bring you that can be pleasurable.
And that's exactly it, because everybody's going to be incredibly different on what sensations feel good. And I think that's the whole point of it, is leaning into your body and what feels good when.
Yeah, and it gives you a set of tools that you can ask your partner for as well. Some of those things you might do for yourself, like, going to yoga or something like that. But you might also ask your partner and say, hey, it's an accelerator for me when you, put your hands around my neck really gently, or you play with my hair, when you grab my butt, or things like that. There are things you can ask for physically. It brings those offers, those bids for sexuality.
Oh, I love it. I think you're spot on there.
So let's look at the last category. So this is environmental accelerators. So things within your environment that might turn you on.
And sometimes you don't have any control over your environment, and sometimes you do. So I think that's important to keep in mind.
Definitely. All of these accelerators and brakes are all contingent on our privilege, right? And our ability and our context as well.
Yeah, the context, exactly. In terms of environment, though, I hear a lot when couples say, I love having really good lighting in the bedroom, right? The fact that we have a lock on the door is really important to me, because I know that the kids can't walk in. And that is a big one. The another environmental factor that I've seen a lot in my male presenting clients, who I work a lot with ED or PE with, is who aren't in relationships and starting to see someone, and who are incredibly anxious, right, about performing. That's a whole nother topic, but the environmental factor that I notice is that when they go to somebody's house, they're in a foreign environment and they feel like a little bit more pressure and uncomfortable in another environment. So there's just another example of an environmental factor that could be a brake, and then how your body relates to that brake.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess another accelerator I hear a lot from clients is temperature.
Oh,
put the heater on at least a few minutes before you start having sex in that room.
Yes, and yes. I would say, I'm going to gender stereotype here. Women need it hot.
Yep, I have seen that anecdotally with my clients as well. Yeah, you need to get the blood flowing. You genuinely need the blood flowing to genitals to have sex pleasurably. So you do that sometimes by increasing the heat, right?
Yeah, and I'm not sure about where you're located today, but if you're in a cold country, a cold environment, just stripping off naked can just sometimes be a little bit chilly.
Yeah.
So let's warm those bodies up.
Yeah, let's put your body in a condition where you want to get naked and you want to get sexy. So big environmental factors for sexuality. Right, well, let's look at some of the brakes, Lauren. So let's start with the cognitive ones. So things in your mind that might present as brakes.
Well, I'm not sure how many people don't have anxiety at some stage in life. That's a statistic I probably need to research. But anxiety and stress are massive brakes. And the anxiety and stress are a spectrum. So we could be stressed about little things or major things, but that is going to kind of factor into the brakes here.
Definitely. Those thought patterns that disconnect you from your body, that keep you stuck in your mind, are huge breaks. We need to feel in our bodies to feel pleasure. It's really hard when you've got something blocking you cognitively, like an anxious thought or an intruding thought.
Yeah, and the other thing that comes to mind too are negative beliefs or negative self-talk, right? So if your inner monologue is shaming yourself, if your inner monologue is saying you're not good enough, you're not good at sex, it doesn't work out well. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah, challenging thoughts can really affect your mind, right? We are what we think. So being able to really work with your thought patterns and address them in a way that works for you can really overcome some of these breaks. A lot of these cognitive breaks and all our breaks can be movable if we put some work into adjusting them.
Yeah. And I mean, nobody's going to want to have sex or have a really great experience if you're telling yourself, I'm not good at it, or this is all a bad experience. I mean, I just kind of like to go simple terms. They're unsexy thoughts. Unsexy thoughts don't help. They just don't help.
Yep, they don't help. And there are ways you can move them. So they can be shaped, they can be changed. I guess another cognitive break that I see a lot with couples is the mental load, which we can do a whole episode on. But carrying that list in your head of, I've got to get the chores done. I've got to do the dishes. I've got to do that work assignment. That goes like a running treadmill through a lot of people's minds when they're looking to engage sexually.
Yeah, and I'm going to guess that kind of then trickles into the interpersonal ones, right? Because if you're talking about the mental load, you're then kind of sometimes wishing your partner did more, and that you're then holding a lot more. And then you might have a little bit of a resentment slip in. And that's going to probably be a break to then have to give them sex as well. This is language that I've heard in session quite often. And it just doesn't make for sex time. It's just a really strong break.
Yeah, definitely. How we relate to our partner, those interpersonal breaks are hugely important, right? Whether you're in conflict or not is a big factor. Do you want to have sex with your partner when you're really annoyed at them, when there's unresolved difficulties?
Yeah, or if they're not speaking to you. If it's been 6 days and your partner hasn't been speaking to you, do you really want to have sex with them? Probably not.
Yeah.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, absolutely. And, these interpersonal breaks are for both of you to look at. All of the partners involved need to overcome these breaks. We have a responsibility in activating those changes as a group.
I think that is a really good point.
So there are different categories of brakes and accelerators that you can explore, and different ways that you can actually arouse yourself. So I guess I'm looking at some of the common presentations that we see, Lauren, in clinical work with clients that are struggling with their brakes and accelerators. What are some common things that you see for your work?
Are you asking in terms of brakes?
In terms of clients coming in with discrepancies.
What are the discrepancies? I think the mental load's a big one. That one kind of hit home to me because I hear about that, daily, if not weekly, where one person has a lot to do. Both partners are contributing to the house, to the family, right? But one person might take on a little bit more. And if they have more of a responsive desire, right, they're going to need triggers to help them to say yes. So it's these people can often fall into the brakes a lot easier, right? They're throwing the brakes on because they've got stress, they've got anxiety, they've got the mental load, they've got those interpersonal issues. Their bodies aren't on, and now they're going to have to want sex, right? So it feels like a lot of hurdles to jump through for these people, and I really can empathize with them because coming in, it seems like a mess, right? Once we kind of get into the work, we tease out the mess, and people can start seeing the light, right? Well, we can tidy each of these little cells. We can really start making progress here.
Definitely. And it is about, the pair working together, if you're talking about a monogamous couple, to actually figure out how to navigate that mental load problem, which ironically is a pathway toward increasing sexual desire.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the other biggest couple you just reminded me is when one person is supposed to be initiating the sex and they're not.
Yeah. So when there's a brake on that person.
Yeah.
And they're not overcoming their brakes and they're just stuck with their brakes heavily on.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a really tough one.
Yeah, and that kind of ties into our last episode on sexual initiation, right? And what a trap it is to, put all of your eggs into one basket of who's the sexual initiator. But it's a common one, and it really gets people to start throwing on the brakes here, and sex then will not be initiated.
Yeah, that discrepancy between two people and that tension and that expectation can really slam those brakes down. And once they're on, they can be hard to remove. We need to look at this from many ways. You need to be able to overcome your own individual brakes. So if you have cognitive brakes through your mind, you need to overcome those for yourself. If you have interpersonal brakes, then you need to work them through with your partner. Environmental brakes, you can change them together outside of you.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite things that I hear in session is when somebody says, so I just need to think about this a little bit differently. And it's that light bulb moment when they go, wow, so this isn't working for me. And if I just think about it like this, I'm then going to potentially want to have sex. And it actually starts working. It's such a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah, that license to think a bit creatively in sexuality and particularly the lead up to sex is really powerful, because a lot of people come in and they guesstimate their partner's accelerators, right? And they go, oh, you're going to love it if I touch you here and here and here, and you're going to just be so ready for sex then. But that person might have accelerators that are completely different to that.
That is such a good point. And that's why you need to know about your partner. I think this kind of then starts bringing up the topic of context though, Lauren.
Yes, context.
Right? Because if you're starting to touch your partner in ways that you think turns them on, and maybe historically this did turn them on, but it's not all of a sudden, I need you to start looking at what's the context in this scenario, right? Is there something new going on?
Yeah, like imagine that you're with your partner and, the brakes are away, that there's no stress. You've got a beautiful warm room that they're in. They're feeling really good in their body. They're not having any anxious thoughts because they've had a week off work and you're in a beautiful holiday in Bali, right? And there's all these accelerators. You're having a great time, lots of fun, lots of connection. You're feeling really fit because you've gone for lots of walks or you've been really stimulated seeing the local community. And then, all these accelerators are on and all the brakes are gone. We're in prime position and your mum is sharing a room with you in the villa, right? Context matters.
It certainly does. Yep. And that's going to throw on some massive brakes for people. Not everyone. Hey, each to their own. But for a lot of people that I speak to, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. One of the biggest challenging context situations that I see, and I'm not sure if you've seen this, Lauren, or if you've lived it too, right, is for parents. Having children really changes your sexual context, and putting the moves on someone with the brakes and accelerators in that context of having children and being parents can feel really different.
Yeah. Being a parent isn't really the sexiest of roles. So, I think it's really important to identify yourself as still a sexual being and also a parent. And it's how can you wear these two hats? And I think that's a whole another episode in itself is, how can you be a parent and deal with all of the unsexy things that kids bring to the table and all the spontaneity that comes with being a parent and all the disasters? And why should you park your sexuality? Because this has all come up. I'm a firm believer of not parking your sexuality, but hey, I'm a biased sex therapist, so I'll put that on the table, no worries.
Well, it just means that you have to renegotiate, right? I think that's the challenge is once you work these brakes and accelerators out, yes, you have a beautiful map for your partner's sexuality, but it's time limited and it's contingent on context. So if your context changes, you need to check what's going on. What are your brakes and accelerators now? If time goes on, reevaluate. Do these accelerators still work for you? Are there new brakes that we need to overcome? It's a living beast.
Exactly. I think that's a great thing to say is this is something that you need to keep thinking about and keep talking about. But with that, though, I'd also like to say you need to cut yourself some slack. It's okay to, I guess, back to that parent example, to have worked with all those brakes, push the accelerators. You've got your sexy hat on. You've taken off the parent hat. But you know what? When it comes down to it, you're just too bloody exhausted. You just can't do anything that you've actually imagined and mustered up all of the courage to do. And you know what? That's okay, because it'll happen again. It will happen again. You're a human, and don't beat yourself up.
That's right. It won't work every time, and that's fine. The more knowledge you have about yourself and your sexuality, the better, but you can't control all the factors. So just get the information you can on what you can and have with it what feels good at the time. I think it's interesting too, though, when we look at some people, they have a really sensitive accelerator. So lots of things will really turn them on. And clinically, I see this a lot, gender stereotyping, but with cis het males, where they say, oh yeah, everything turns me on. I'm really ready to go, right? When we really break it down, a lot of those guys have quite a lot of brakes. They've just not really looked at them.
Yes.
But I guess the other challenge is when we have a really sensitive accelerator, it's not a good thing necessarily, right? It can still have good and bad things. Of course, you get turned on quite a lot, but it can also mean that you're turned on in not necessarily the most appropriate contexts, or things that would otherwise be a break, like your mum being in the villa next door might not turn you off. So you might get caught having sex when you shouldn't, or be more likely to want to have sexuality in a setting which isn't necessarily condoned in a relationship, perhaps.
That's a good point. Or even just simply, you're turned on all the time, and your partner is working 16-hour days and they're not around. And sometimes what that then presents with is one person pursuing sex and being very frustrated because their partner's not around to give it to them. And that's a whole can of worms that I'm not going to open up today.
Absolutely. And we also find the other situation where we have people with a really sensitive brake. So lots of things turn them off. They're really sensitive to stuff that turns them off. And that's, a thought that goes through their mind, all the stress, all that's going on will just shut them down completely. We do a lot of work with those people to really overcome those brakes. And sometimes for those people, they actually have quite a lot of accelerators that they haven't really looked at or they haven't invested in. So sometimes there's actually quite a lot to work with for those people, but they're so focused on the brakes that they've missed out on all the accelerators.
That is a really good point, and it gives people hope.
Yeah.
Right? However, the consequence, though, of people in that position, which is common, right? But the consequence is a partner who gets frustrated. So if you're seeing your partner with who's very sensitive to brakes, it's okay to get frustrated and feel like you've tried a lot and it's getting you nowhere. That is what I do, come across, and that this is when it gets to the nitty-gritty couple work. To kind of figure out, well, how can you work together a little bit better and normalize the frustration that's okay. But rather than turning away from your partner, which is then going to, it's going to just stop sex altogether, unfortunately, you have to keep turning towards. It's so tricky, but it's doable.
Yeah, that's right, Lauren. It's really hard if you're on the receiving end of a hard brake and you're someone that has a really strong accelerator, because you're ready to go all the time and they're really not. And that discrepancy can lead to a lot of frustration and a real lack of understanding of each other. And so trying to know that your relationship dynamic, remember, interpersonal is a category for brakes. It plays a huge role. So you can actually have some buy-in on shaping this situation. You have that active role.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I don't think you could have said it any better. Thanks, Lauren.
You. Well, yeah. So today we've explored brakes and accelerators, the dual control model, what turns you on and turns you off. We've looked at the categories: cognitive, physical, interpersonal, and environmental.
Thank you for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.